Most people think they struggle because they haven't found the right solution yet. They assume progress is waiting somewhere just beyond the next method, next plan, or next realization. But there is something strange about how the mind works. Sometimes the clearer the solution becomes, the stronger the resistance feels. You understand what to do, you see why it matters, and yet nothing changes. This creates confusion because it feels illogical. If understanding is present, action should follow, but often the opposite happens. Clarity increases and movement decreases. This isn't laziness, and it isn't lack of discipline. It's a pattern, and once you see the pattern, something important becomes obvious. The mind is not designed to follow solutions. It is designed to preserve stability. And stability to the brain matters more than improvement. We are taught from a young age that knowledge leads to change. Learn more, improve more, understand more, act more. But this belief hides something crucial. Knowledge does not automatically produce movement. In fact, knowledge can sometimes create pressure, and pressure often produces hesitation. When a person becomes aware of what they should do, they also become aware of what they have not done. That awareness can feel heavy. Instead of motivating action, it can quietly increase avoidance. The brain begins associating the solution with discomfort, not because the solution is wrong, but because it represents uncertainty, and uncertainty is something the mind is built to resist. So the issue isn't that people don't understand what would help them. Often they understand perfectly. The real issue is that understanding and action are controlled by different systems. Inside every person are two separate processes operating at the same time. One system thinks, the other protects. The thinking system analyzes, plans, and evaluates possibilities. It is curious and logical. The protective system does something very different. It scans for risk, detects change, and prevents instability. When both systems agree, action feels easy. But when they disagree, hesitation appears. Most people assume hesitation means they need more motivation or more discipline. In reality, hesitation usually means the protective system has detected a threat. That threat might not be real danger. It can simply be unfamiliarity. The brain treats unfamiliar experiences cautiously because unfamiliarity historically meant risk. So even when a solution is clearly helpful, if it represents change, the protective system may quietly slow everything down. A solution represents movement away from what currently exists. That sounds positive, but to the brain it signals transition, and transition is unpredictable. Predictability feels safe because it allows the mind to conserve energy. The moment a person considers applying a real solution, their internal system begins calculating unknowns. What will change? What might happen? What if it fails? These questions don't always appear consciously. Often they happen beneath awareness as a subtle feeling of reluctance. This is why people can feel motivated one moment and resistant the next. Nothing external changed. The calculation simply finished. The mind evaluated the cost of change and decided to slow down. Not to sabotage progress, but to maintain stability. From the brain's perspective, stability is always the priority. One of the strangest psychological experiences is realizing exactly what would help you and still not doing it. This can feel frustrating, even embarrassing, but the reaction itself follows a pattern. When clarity appears, expectations often appear with it. Once you know what to do, you feel that you should do it. That word should adds weight. The action is no longer optional. It becomes a test. And tests create pressure. Pressure shifts the nervous system into evaluation mode. Instead of moving forward, the mind begins monitoring performance. Monitoring reduces fluidity. Actions that would normally feel simple start to feel deliberate and heavy. The person interprets this heaviness as difficulty. In truth, it is simply self-observation interfering with natural movement. When the mind senses pressure, it often responds with delay. Delay is not always conscious procrastination. Sometimes it shows up as distraction, fatigue, or sudden interest in unrelated tasks. These reactions are not random, they are protective. The brain is buying time. Time allows it to reassess whether change is safe. From the outside, delay looks unproductive. From the inside, it feels strangely reasonable. That is why people often justify postponing things they genuinely want to do. The delay feels logical in the moment. Only later does it look unnecessary. This pattern reveals something important. Resistance rarely feels like resistance while it is happening. It feels like caution. And caution to the mind feels intelligent. Many people believe the solution to hesitation is more motivation. They assume if they could just feel more driven, everything would become easier. But motivation is not designed to override the protective system. Motivation is an emotional signal, and emotions fluctuate. Protection, however, is structural. It is built into the nervous system. That means motivation can encourage action briefly, but it cannot sustain action if the brain still perceives risk. This is why bursts of enthusiasm often fade quickly. The person didn't lose interest. Their protective system simply regained influence. When that happens, the mind begins steering back toward familiar territory, not because the person is weak, but because the brain prefers predictability over possibility. Understanding this removes a common misunderstanding. The problem isn't lack of motivation. The problem is that motivation alone cannot negotiate with the part of the mind designed to prevent uncertainty. People often tell themselves they will act when they feel ready. It sounds sensible, even responsible, but readiness is not a fixed state that suddenly appears. It is a feeling the mind produces when perceived risk drops low enough. If someone waits for complete readiness, they may wait indefinitely, because the brain can always imagine another unknown variable. This creates a subtle trap. The person believes they are being patient or careful, when in reality they are waiting for a level of certainty that never fully arrives. The protective system keeps adjusting the requirement. Just a little more preparation, just a little more understanding, just a little more time. Each adjustment feels reasonable. Together they create delay, not intentional delay, but structural delay. The mind is trying to eliminate uncertainty before movement, and uncertainty can never be completely removed. When action feels difficult, thinking becomes attractive. Thinking feels safe because it does not change anything externally. It gives the sensation of progress without triggering the risk systems associated with real movement. A person can analyze, plan, research, and imagine improvement for hours without leaving their current state. This is why overthinking often replaces doing. It is not laziness. It is substitution. The brain is choosing the safest available activity that still feels constructive. From its perspective, this is efficient. It maintains stability while preserving the illusion of advancement. But thinking and doing are processed differently. Thinking happens internally and predictably. Doing happens externally and unpredictably. The protective system prefers internal activity. So when a solution requires real-world action, the mind may gently redirect attention back toward reflection instead. One of the most overlooked psychological patterns is that familiar difficulty can feel safer than unfamiliar improvement. If someone has lived with a certain problem for a long time, that problem becomes predictable. Predictability reduces mental load. Even if the situation is uncomfortable, it is known. Change, however, introduces unknown variables. The brain compares the two and sometimes chooses the known discomfort over the unknown alternative. This can look irrational from the outside. Why would someone remain in a situation they dislike? But from the brain's perspective, predictability equals safety. The mind is not measuring happiness. It is measuring stability. So it may resist solutions simply because they alter a familiar pattern. Not because the solution is bad, but because the current state is known. The unknown always requires more energy to process than the familiar. The brain is constantly managing energy. Every decision, adjustment, or change requires resources, Because of this, the mind naturally prefers options that conserve effort. Familiar routines require very little energy. New actions require more. When a solution demands new behavior, the brain calculates cost. If the perceived effort seems high, hesitation increases. This is not a character flaw, it is efficiency logic. The mind is designed to avoid unnecessary expenditure, so unless something feels urgent or unavoidable, the system may delay action simply to preserve resources. This explains why people often act quickly in emergencies but slowly in ordinary situations. Urgency overrides conservation. Without urgency, conservation dominates. Solutions that require change often appear energy expensive at first, even if they would eventually make life easier. The brain reacts to the immediate cost, not the long-term benefit. A solution can unintentionally feel like a threat when it challenges identity. If someone has spent years seeing themselves a certain way, change can feel destabilizing. Even positive change can trigger this reaction. The mind may interpret improvement as loss of familiarity. This doesn't happen consciously. It shows up as subtle resistance, doubt, or hesitation. The person might say they want to change, yet feel uneasy when it becomes possible. That uneasiness is the protective system noticing something unfamiliar. Identity is one of the strongest stabilizing forces in the brain. Anything that appears to alter it can trigger caution. So resistance is not always about the action itself. Sometimes it is about what the action represents. The brain is asking a silent question: if this changes, who will I be? Once hesitation begins, it can reinforce itself. A person delays action, then notices the delay, then feels pressure because of the delay. That pressure increases discomfort, which increases avoidance, which increases delay again. This creates a loop. The loop is not intentional, it is mechanical. Each part feeds the next. The person often believes they need more force to break the cycle, but force increases pressure, and pressure strengthens resistance. So the loop continues. The reason this pattern is so common is because it is self-maintaining. It does not require effort to continue. It runs automatically. Understanding the loop does something important. It reveals that the struggle is not random. It is patterned. And patterns can be recognized. Recognition doesn't instantly remove them, but it changes how they are experienced. Trying to force change often produces the opposite result. When the mind feels pushed, it activates stronger protection. This is similar to how the body reacts to physical pressure. Push harder, resistance increases. The same principle applies psychologically. Force signals urgency, and urgency signals threat. When threat is detected, the brain prioritizes defense over progress. This is why strict pressure, harsh self-criticism, or extreme discipline can sometimes reduce consistency instead of improving it. The system interprets intensity as danger. Instead of cooperating, it tightens control. The person then assumes they need even more force. But that only strengthens the reaction. The issue isn't effort, it's pressure. Effort can move you forward. Pressure can make the mind push back. They look similar from the outside, but internally they are processed very differently. Resistance is often misunderstood as opposition. In reality, resistance is protection. It is the mind's attempt to keep conditions stable. Stability is the brain's default preference because stability has historically meant survival. So when resistance appears, it is not trying to stop you, it is trying to stabilize you. This distinction changes how hesitation is interpreted. Instead of seeing resistance as failure, it can be seen as information. It reveals that the protective system has detected uncertainty. That detection does not mean the action is wrong. It only means it is unfamiliar. Once you see resistance this way, it stops feeling like an enemy and starts looking like a signal. The signal isn't telling you to stop. It's telling you something new is happening. Movement tends to happen more naturally when pressure is low. A calm nervous system processes change differently than a tense one. When tension drops, the protective system reduces its activity. This allows action to feel smoother and less forced. That is why people often find themselves able to do things easily when they stop trying so hard. It is not that effort disappeared, it is that pressure did. Without pressure, the brain stops interpreting action as a threat. It begins treating it as neutral. Neutral states require less defense. Less defense means less resistance. This is why calm environments often produce more consistent behavior than intense ones. Calm does not remove effort. It removes unnecessary friction. The brain reacts differently to small shifts than to large ones. Large changes signal unpredictability. Small changes signal adjustment. Because of this, gradual movement often feels easier than dramatic transformation. The protective system monitors scale. If something appears too big, it increases caution. If something appears manageable, it allows motion. This is not about strategy. It is about perception. The same action can feel easy or difficult depending on how large it appears mentally. When something feels overwhelming, resistance rises. When something feels contained, resistance lowers. The action itself hasn't changed. Only its perceived scale has. The brain responds to perception more than reality. Seeing these patterns doesn't magically remove them, but it does something powerful. It changes interpretation. Instead of reacting to hesitation with frustration, a person can recognize it as a predictable response. That recognition reduces tension. Reduced tension lowers resistance. So even though understanding doesn't directly create action, it can indirectly make action easier, not by pushing the mind, but by calming it. The brain behaves differently when it feels understood rather than pressured. This is why awareness often precedes change. Awareness doesn't force movement. It softens the internal environment so movement can happen. Real change rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. Often it feels subtle, almost unnoticeable. The mind prefers gradual transitions because they preserve stability. When change happens quietly, the protective system doesn't react strongly. This allows adjustment to continue without interruption. People sometimes overlook these quiet shifts because they expect transformation to feel intense, but intensity is not required for movement. In fact, intensity can interfere with it. Quiet change is often the most sustainable kind, because it doesn't alarm the system responsible for maintaining balance. There are times when it feels like nothing is changing at all, but that feeling can be misleading. Internal systems can be adjusting long before visible results appear. The brain often recalibrates slowly, especially when dealing with unfamiliar patterns. During that period, progress may not be obvious. The absence of visible movement does not always mean absence of internal movement. Sometimes it means the system is stabilizing. Stabilization is not failure. It is preparation. The mind is aligning its internal processes so that change can occur without triggering alarm signals. When all of this is seen together, a clear picture emerges. Struggle is not always a sign that something is wrong. Often it is a sign that something new is being considered. Resistance is not proof that a solution won't work. It is proof that the brain has noticed a difference. And noticing difference is exactly what the protective system is supposed to do. The mind is functioning as designed, not perfectly, but predictably. Understanding that predictability changes how difficulty feels. Instead of seeming chaotic, it begins to look structured, and structure is something the mind understands well. So if you've ever wondered why clear solutions still feel hard to follow, the answer may not be what you expected. It may not be motivation, discipline, or willpower. It may simply be the natural behavior of a mind that values stability more than change. Once that is seen, something becomes quieter. The struggle stops feeling mysterious. It starts feeling understandable, and when something is understandable, it becomes easier to observe. Not fix, not force, just observe. Because sometimes the most important shift is not action. It is understanding why action sometimes feels difficult in the first place.